You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Avram Kivelevich, and I hope you enjoy this episode. You're blowing the dust off the old books. You're trying to find an ancient treasure. Yes, the Antiquarian who has Semicha has arrived. But first, you've heard me on this platform touting NRS, a great company whose many dedicated employees I get to see in action. NRS Pay has recently launched its new cost-cutting program called Cash Discount. The way it works is, any vendor using NRS Pay Cash Discount has their sale register tabulating automatically a dual pricing, which offers customers a choice of a cash payment, which could result in an up to 4% discount over swiping their card. If your business meets the $18,000 a month threshold, there's absolutely no monthly fee to incur. NRS Pay Cash Discount makes it less expensive to accept credit cards, so you'll save money while helping your customers save at the same time. NRS is offering a time-limited deal right now on this state-of-the-art system. You'll get a free card reader with 0 hidden fees, no long-term contract, and no early termination fee, which means you can switch your processing plan without penalty. NRS Pay is a proud part of the IDT Corporation that I've been associated with for over 10 years and has integrity built into its corporate DNA. I know its founder, its officers, and salespeople, and they truly stand by their product and will help you with live, stateside-based customer service on any issue or question. Check nrspay.com for more information or call 833-289-2767. And now, the Antiquarian.
Clear the dust off. The Antiquarian has Semicha. Yes, Yitzchak Kolakowski and I, we are clearing the dust off. Yitzchak is actually pushing a lot of dust because he's actually in his dusty automobile driving down the highway, doing 64, at least, getting all that dust out of the way of his wheels and engine. As it motivates, and we are here to dust off the past and perhaps bring to light some things that are inspiring and interesting, things you might not know about. Yitzchak felt, and I agree with him, that it's important to take note of the national commemoration of Veterans Day, which is November 11th. Originally it was called Armistice Day, and it was connected to the cessation of hostilities in World War I believe. And it has morphed into a day to remember the unity, the inspiration that was given to us by our veterans. And although, a lot of these days, Yitzchak, in the national consciousness have sort of morphed into Memorial Day, where we remember the dead who have fallen in various wars. Veterans Day was to really recognize the significance of what the veterans, what these warriors have done for this country and for freedom throughout the world. I think that there is a significance for us as Jews in this very difficult period in our modern history to remember really what happened here in the United States during, I'm not going to talk about World War I because I don't believe it really unified in the same way World War II did. Now, again, there might be historians who will disagree with that presumption, but I think everything that I've read and seen indicated that there was something about World War II that brought the United States together in ways of self-sacrifice for a cause that was clear. I think it's hooked that in World War I, the idea of fighting the Germans, the Kaiser, etc. It was sort of like there was a lot of geopolitical stuff going on that I think was beyond the ken of many. We knew that we had to support France. We knew that we had to support England. I don't know if there was protest at home, but I think World War II, despite the voices that were sounded against it originally as the Jews' war, as Roosevelt's war, once the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred, I think there was an understanding that there was a threat not only to Europe, its Jews and its other citizens, but the Japanese-German axis could lead to the takeover of the planet under the crushing dictatorship of either Germany or Japan. Anybody that doubts this, you can watch the Amazon series, The Man in the High Castle, which of course was based on a short story novella by Philip K. Dick, which speculated what would the world have been like had it been taken over by the Germans and the Japanese. So I think there was a sense that we were fighting for our country, fighting for our freedom, fighting for great, great causes. And there was a unity that was evident. And I think we're seeing almost the exact same spirit in Eretz Yisrael today and spreading through world Jewry that supports Eretz Yisrael. The type of, we need to all give in. We need to all dig deep. We need to be part of this. We need to scrimp and save. We have to go without certain things. And the type of love and concern for the GIs that was evidenced in World War II, you see the exact same, and perhaps even more in Eretz Yisrael, where I think it's every chayal is not just a son, as Arthur Miller wrote in his play, but actually a brother, a loved one, part of yourself. They're not just all my sons, they are all of us. And therefore, Yitzchak and I thought that not only to celebrate Veterans Day and to recognize the spirit of community and service that's going on in Eretz Yisrael, we thought we would look back at a couple of things that were part of American Jewish and perhaps not so Jewish World War II artifacts from that period. Yitzchak, there was another aspect here that sparked your interest, and that had to do with something that was given to you, sort of a patrimonious gift that was given to you, correct?
Yeah, so several gifts that I received from my grandfathers. My father's father served in World War II. He actually served in both theaters, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific in World War II. And then my mother's father, my Zayda, he served in Korea. And these curious artifacts that I have in my possession, I remember from what I call my grandpa, who wasn't Jewish, my father's father, we had like a little booklet of when he spent some time in Australia that was given out to the GIs to explain, proper conduct when visiting Australia. It had the lyrics to Waltzing Matilda, which was actually one of my Zayda's favorite songs, said how the Australians love the Americans. And so the strong feeling of unity and brotherhood, love among the English-speaking world, particularly between Australia and America. And then the other type of memorabilia and so forth that I recall very fondly from my Zayda was the various things that the Jewish Welfare Board produced for the soldiers. So there were Sidurim and the Tanakh, and also, whether I'm not sure if it was from my Zayda or I found it in the Seamus box, or don't quite recall where I got this from, but I found like a Zviris book, a songster, as they would call it, song book, Jewish song, songs for Jewish soldiers. And we found copies of this volume in PDF form on the internet. And looking through that preparation for this particular recording, quite amusing, but also somewhat rather inspiring to look at not only that, but the Sidurim and the Machzorim.
We'll talk about some of the Siddurs specifically in a minute. But again, these are things which you can find online in the Internet Archive and other places. And of course, some of them, the actual items themselves are now collector's items that are sold at various places that you can obtain them. But this was it was like a hymnal, which of course, for many Christians is almost a standard book that's used as part of the Sunday devotional, which is, there's the Bible passages that the priest will read from, but there's also the hymnal, which are various songs that the congregation would sing from. And these were all songs with inspiration. Some of them had musical notes. And this book that you shared with me has musical notes in it. Those people who are interested. I noted that a lot of the vintage of these songs was quite old in some cases. And even though it was being used in World War II for the Navy and the Army and the various forces, the songs seemed to be quite old. And, some of them, I guess, were some of the standards that any Jewish home would know about. Some of them were a little bit strange. Like there was one that I mentioned to you, and you found it also quite interesting. It's called Descend, O Sabbath Princess.
I was curious, did anybody ever actually sing those English songs? Like that. Quite a curiosity. I tried to find any recordings I could find of the song to no avail, but I found more than one place where the sheet music is available online. And
so if any of you antiquarians want to help create a new recording of that incredible sort of Kabbalistically influenced song, as he talks about the light of the Shekhinah and other things, that is called Descend, O Sabbath Princess. We'd love for you to be able to find it and send us a recording of it. We'll play it here on the Antiquarian. You'll be able to get your 5 minutes of fame. Let's talk about the prayer book. I thought this was quite interesting, Yitzchak. And again, it's not based on any super scholarly research. It's just what's on the Internet Archive. Let's give a little background. The Jewish Welfare Board was formed 4 days after America's entry into World War I, with the understanding that the very sizable population of Jews that had come to America up until that time, this is before the limits on Jewish population post-World War I. So there were many Jews who were, some of them immigrants, some of them just born to turn of the century or around that time, that were ready to join the armed forces to really show their blood was imbued with the same spirit of America. And there were many Jews that enlisted, that were part of a draft, that came to be part of the fighting forces. So the Jewish Welfare Board was formed in order to sort of give some protection for these Jews, to let them know that the same way there would be chaplains for the Christian members of the army, but there would be aspects that Jewish members of the fighting forces in all, not just overseas, even in training and various forts and camps throughout the United States. So the Jewish Welfare Board, like many great ideas, really was a product of war and recognizing that we needed something to unify Jews all over the United States.
Still to this day, the Jewish Welfare Board is an organization that endorses chaplains and is involved in many other things. I know if anyone who wants a job as a chaplain in the VA, as a rabbi or cantor, any other Jewish clergy, needs approval from the Jewish Welfare Board. That's in addition to other requirements that the VA has.
And I think we should also give credit to them, because through their organizing, many other sort of ragtag Jewish sort of institutions sort of became one. And we have, through the Jewish Welfare Board post the war, we have the growth of the YMHAs, which were very important, Jewish community centers, which are also the same sort of community service. This was all part of really the spearhead of the Jewish Welfare Board, because it was clear.
I think now the Jewish Welfare Board is under the umbrella of the JCC of America.
I think there was a sense that, and it might have been rabbinic and lay leaders that realized that we need something to bond Jews throughout. And one of the things that first siddur that they produced, and it was produced in conjunction with Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox rabbinate, and it was a siddur that, if you read it, they take pains to tell you that this is something for the men in uniform who are going to be in situations where they perhaps cannot attend normal services, but they would still like to be inspired by the words, and here they can have it. It's something that's handy. Now, we should mention, of course, that the idea of sort of condensing and creating booklets for servicemen, Jewish servicemen in particular, was something that was already done by the Chafetz Chaim himself, and by people who took the Machne Yisroel, which was the Chafetz Chaim's sefer for the Jewish soldier who would be found in serving in Russia and other places under foreign powers, sort of a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch that would direct the person in his activities. And of course, it was published in Europe with a Yiddish translation on the bottom. I don't know if you've ever seen these editions, Yitzchak. So the great Chafetz Chaim, who was so prescient about so many things, already understood that Jews would be drafted into war, and they would need to have sort of a lot of shas hatchak, a lot of situations that were not standard, in order to know how to still feel that they were connected to Jewish life. So this siddur that I am about to read to you from is in the path that had already been carved out, not only by Christian leaders, but by Jewish leaders as well. But this was in English for Americans. And as I said, the one in World War I, which this was based on, didn't have the same sort of flowery introduction. I'm going to read you from the introduction right now. So this is it was printed in 1941. Seems like it was either right after Pearl Harbor or even before, and there had already been 150,000 copies. So here it is. May this prayer book, small enough in size to be carried in a pocket over the heart, bear the spiritual message of Israel's ancient prayers to the heart of American Jewish soldiers and sailors serving their country. The prayers here gathered together speak of the eternal aspirations of the Jewish people and indeed of all mankind. They lift the soul above the immediate cares and interests of the daily round to the sphere of tenderness, purity, and faith that is divine. They link those far from home with some of the most beautiful and uplifting associations of family life. They quicken loyalty to loved ones and to all one's fellow men. They strengthen against temptation and give courage to spurn evil and hold fast to faith in the ultimate triumph of the good. In furthering the high purpose, this little volume of devotion serves not only the men who use it, but also the highest ideal of America. Now, that introduction was unique to the 1941 edition, and I think it bespeaks the idea of the justice of the cause of the United States. And it tries, I think, Yitzchak, to meld Judaism together with being a great American citizen, especially a soldier.
I'm reflecting on this. Why am I driving? I'm driving up to Lakewood from a chasana, and the father of the chassan, who's a colleague of mine as a prison chaplain, is also a military chaplain. So in the Israeli army and now he's serving the American army. And he told me he's going to be deployed next week out to Kuwait to be a chaplain for Hanukkah for the Jewish soldiers who are stationed currently in Kuwait. And so he was discussing, what he's involved with over there and work there. So
let me just make a comment from 80 years ago. The implied literacy is already much more than you would expect from the average 20-year-old today. I'm not saying that it's Shakespeare or Dickens, but you can see the elevated prose of the introduction, and you're right. Maybe the average guy didn't even know what he was looking at, but I think it shows you that we were dealing with a more literate and an innocent group of soldiers.
I mean, that's only part of the curiosity of the Siddurim that, came the English Siddurim that came out of whether it was England or America. When Philip Birnbaum translated his Siddur, he noted how difficult the language was, and he tried to, in his time, his Siddur was much more readable than the Siddurim that, whether it was the authorized prayer book from Singer or other.
We can talk about, Yitzchak, the efficacy and the exactitude and the awkwardness of some of the translations. But this, of course, the idea that the purpose of prayer is to lift your soul above the cares and interests of the daily round, and that's going to make you a better person and a better soldier as well. Now, one of the things, Yitzchak, this siddur soft pedals, which I mentioned to you, the 1921 edition and the 1958 edition are much more strident about, is that this is only meant for this purpose when you're in a situation where you can't have a full service. This siddur, and I'll show you let's read what it says, including only the essence of the principal Jewish services of prayer, It's designed to be used where the exigencies of life in the army or the navy do not permit attendance at regular synagogue services with their incomparable richness of spiritual inspiration. But it doesn't give you that extra warning the earlier and later siddur does. But don't think that this means that when you leave, when you come back from the war, that this is going to be your standard siddur. And of course, one of the things that, which I assume was put into the 1958 edition, was due to the Orthodox input that did not want this to follow in the Charamim that were issued when the Hamburg Temple and its siddur was circulated, where many sections were excised and were shortened. And of course, there was the condemnation of the Chassam Sofer, of Kiveger, and all the Gedolei Ador, which were in the book Eila Divrei Abris, which you can also find on Hebrew books. I think because of that, they had to write specifically, this is only B'shas Adchak Godel. Let me just read the last paragraph. May this manual of prayer, which from the hallowed ideals of the past draws religious inspiration for the present, help towards achieving a future of peace and human brotherhood under the Father of all mankind, which of course is the idea behind the fighting in World War II. That is why people from Des Moines, Iowa, landed on the shores of Normandy. And again, when we think about the sacrifices of these red-blooded American kids to go overseas, to crush, to fight, to die, it is incredible. It was unheard of in human history that so many from so far should travel and be so courageous for a cause that was not in their home, was not in their backyard. And these are the type of phrases that's diffused in the radio and talked about, of course, on our show, The Projectionist. And it really is something that I believe, in Eretz Yisrael today, as I mentioned in the introduction, they are tapping into. They are realizing that this is a cause of justice. And of course, it's their life. It's still incredible, the miracle, as it would be, of the American involvement in World War II, because obviously without that involvement, we don't know if we would be here, Yitzchak. I don't think I would be here, but clearly that is something. Also, I just want to mention that this siddur from 1941 was worked on by Solomon Freehoff, who of course was a Reform rabbi and quote unquote posek, Rabbi Eugene Cohen, who I am not so familiar with, and Dr. David Disolopul, who was actually the Orthodox of the bunch, who ended up writing the 1958 or 59 RCA siddur, the translation. And he worked on this translation for this abridged siddur, but he also went on to fame and in some people's mind, infamy for that work. If you remember that siddur, Yitzchak, it became standard in so many shuls, and yet it didn't start with Birchas HaShachar. It started with the Friday night service, almost with the understanding that even in Orthodox shuls, just like in this abridged siddur, the one that I'm looking at, it starts with Friday night. In other words, that's probably the only time you're going to come to daven is on Shabbos. And, you can see that the morning service for weekdays is pushed later, but in the De Silva Pool siddur of the Rabbinical Council of America, or the Stadrus HaRabbanim, it didn't even have a regular Shachris service. So De Silva Pool was also accused later of adding Christian elements into his siddur translation.
He wrote a very interesting essay comparing the Kaddish to the Lord's Prayer, but he actually did not use that in his translation. I looked into that, and I was looking at how he translated the Kaddish, and I was curious why he didn't use that very familiar refrain, which would be really a fair translation of "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done." It's very much a fair translation of "V'amli v'rachi Rusei v'amlich malchusei." So you would think he would have used that because of that, but he actually didn't. So it wasn't really. It was probably less of the King James style than the earlier Sidurim of Singer and or even Birnbaum. And he had his own very curious things of, for example, Kel Adon, which we know is an acrostic of the Aleph Beis, his translation had an acrostic of the ABCs, which is very, very colorful approach of how he and very inventive. So,
yeah, he definitely took liberties, and I think the RCA was secretly quite embarrassed about the Siddur for years until it was replaced, with a sort of an art scroll edition about 15 or 25 years ago. It's interesting, despite the fact that it's meant for Reform Jews, it also speaks about themes that are clearly very Orthodox. It's interesting, the benching has only the first bracha, Hazonas HaKol, and then Ha'el Avinu Malkeinu HaMelech HaTov HaMeitiv HaKol, U'Heitiv U'Meitiv U'Yeitivonu U'Gemalenu U'Yigmalenu L'Ad Chen V'Chesed Rachamim V'Yaskeinu V'Mos HaMashiach V'Chayo Mabah. So there you see a belief in the Messiah, a belief in the world to come, and clearly that is something that, we know that not all Reform believes in true messianic period. So it's interesting that they didn't object. Obviously, the main thing was that they had to come together with a nusach that I'm sure the Kepedas were more from the Orthodox. Just again, in the bracha before Kriya Shema, we do have something which you don't necessarily expect a Reform Jew to be saying. Saying v'libeinu lohavinu lahaskil l'shmoa lilmod ulamid l'ishmer lasas l'kayim es kol divrei salmon tarasecha. Right? Not all parts of it, including shatnez, including basar b'cholov, including chazir. Right? So that they didn't object to.
Which year version are we looking at? The 1958 version?
I'm looking at the 1941 version.
There's the 1958 version, I know, in the back. Maybe the 41 also has excerpts of Union prayer books. So that it has a separate section for the Orthodox liturgy and for the Reform liturgy. And probably at that time, the conservative movement was using a more Orthodox liturgy.
I think this Siddur prided itself as a coming together of the three branches. And again, I read to you from what we all know from our Tfilos is still in that Siddur, which is V'aviyenu l'shol meyarba kanfos haaretz v'solichenu komimiel suyartzenu, right? To bring us together and bring us to our land, upright to our land, which of course means Eretz Yisrael. It is, I believe, it's not a relic, but an indicator of how Achdus among the Jews was formed. We all know Stephen Wise and many of the Reform leaders agitated for Roosevelt to recognize what was happening to Jewry in Europe. There were marches similar to the march that's planned in Washington next week, where Jewish leaders of all stripes wanted to indicate to the president and to the members of Congress the incredible humanitarian tragedy that was occurring in Europe. In many ways, seeing these Sidurim and other things really, I think, indicates the type of understanding that gripped world Jewry. We weren't aware of the extent of what was happening, unlike sort of the opposite occurring today, where, Hamas's terror was within days known by all, and the war that followed in its wake. I think, in World War II, they knew about the concentration camps. They knew that the Jews were being forced out of their homes, but they didn't realize the mass extermination that was occurring. That was something that really only became obvious in 1944, 1945, especially when the camps were liberated, and we were able to see not only the Nazi films, but of course the actual evidence. But once again, I think that this is a period that we can draw on the unity of the American people and the unity, of course, of the American Jews at this time. Although it's sort of off topic of the unity spirit that's reflected here, I think we should also make mention the sort of literary churning out of material post-World War II. The Jews in Europe who had not yet been able to immigrate to Eretz Yisrael and were in DP camps, they didn't have their Sfarim. So there were a number of printing presses set up after World War II. I happen to have a few Svarim from that period printed in Germany and other places where it was given in the DP camps. Sidurim, Pirkei Avos, Svarim, Siddur. I had a Yavit Siddur for many years, Mishnah Berurah, and other Svarim where they were mimeographed, passed out in copies, sometimes paper thin, because the paper was by necessity a very rare commodity in Europe, they were falling apart. But those Svarim are also a proof how we are the Am HaSefer. You had a nation that was almost obliterated, and yet one of the first things funds were turned to was to return to those people who had survived the Svarim that they so dearly loved. But again, it's sort of a little bit off topic, but again, it's something that's a product of that decade, of the 40s, which I think, antiquarians might find quite interesting, of not only of the content of the words, but the rationale behind their printing and what that indicates. Yitzchak, we wanted to be able to use the means of this podcast to be able to share with you some audio like we did last week. So one of the things that came to mind, and I think you agreed with me, was World War II it was generated out of the American movie studios, not only films for the soldiers and propaganda films to be consumed at home, but also cartoons that were meant to be shown not only overseas and at various bases, but to the American and in this case the Canadian public, to promote devotion, promote a sense of patriotism, and in this specific cartoon that I want to mention, a certain sense of thriftiness and investment. I'm talking about the 1941 Disney cartoon that was actually paid for by the Canadian government, which was called The Thrifty Pig. This is basically a reworking of the 1933 Academy Award short of The Three Little Pigs. Now, as you know, the story of the Three Little Pigs, the big bad wolf is after them. And one of the pigs builds his house from straw. The other builds his house from sticks. And of course, one pig builds his house from bricks. And the wolf is able to huff and puff the first two pigs, but the third pig, the pig whose house is made from bricks, of course, the wolf is frustrated, who cannot blow the house down. And in the original version, I guess, of the fairy tale of the story, the wolf eats the first two pigs, but it's the third pig who, because of his savviness, because of his industriousness, the only way the wolf has able to try to get to the pig is to go through the chimney, where the wolf falls into a kettle of hot water and is boiled to death and I guess eaten by the pig. That is the original version. Of course, Disney in 1933, in making this short, did not want to have that violent type of ending. So first of all, the first two pigs do not get killed. They actually escape to the third pig. And even the wolf, although is thwarted in his attempts to eat the pigs, he actually just ends up running away like a coward as opposed to being eaten. Now, another difference is each pig was given a personality. Disney wanted there to be a song to go along with it. So the first pig is called Fifer Pig, who has a fife, which is, of course, a sort of a flute, a hand flute. And the other pig is called Fiddler Pig. And he has, of course, a violin or a fiddle. It was Fifer Pig and Fiddler Pig who aren't really concerned about the wolf, and they are being lectured to and sort of giving mussar by Practical Pig. And Practical Pig is the one who's building the house of bricks. And Disney was very proud of the fact that he gave each one sort of a little different personality. And in fact, all the characters, especially the big bad wolf, voiced by Billy Bletcher, were very distinct personalities. And Disney felt, Yitzchak, that this was the proof that he could actually expand a dramatic story. And of course, it was on the heels of this a number of years later that he produces Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And this Academy Award winning short didn't just play in 1933. Disney kept it in circulation for many, many years. And in 1941, it was used basically with some of the original footage. The wolf now represented the Nazis. The wolf wears a big swastika on his armband, like a Nazi soldier. And the pigs who don't care, they don't realize the Nazi threat. In other words, the symbolism is that the Nazi threat can't reach our shores. We need to do something. What is Practical Pig doing, or the prudent pig, or the thrifty pig doing in the Disney cartoon of 1941? He's building his house of bricks, and the cartoon makes clear that the bricks are actually pieces. Each brick is a savings bond. Each brick is a Canadian savings bond. And the point is to save by lending the government money. A savings bond means that you actually pay a certain percentage now, which goes to the United States to use for its use, or in Canada in this case. And then as it matures, you're going to be able to get 20% more when the bond matures. So you give up your money now for the sake of the country. And that is what the prudent pig, or the practical pig, was doing, or thrifty pig was doing in the Disney cartoon. What he was doing was building a house that could defend against the Nazis, because the money that he was giving would go to the government. And the cartoon plays out pretty much the same way, where the pig is trying to get in and he can't. I have to tell you, Yitzchak, there's a couple of scenes that are unsettling, and I'm not going to talk about the original one now. Even in the redone version, when I saw the little pigs running away and hiding under the bed from the big bad wolf, I couldn't help but imagine October 7th again in my mind, of the children that were running away from the wolf at the door, hiding under the bed and being in the locked room. It was just, again, the association, I think, was immediate to me. But again, what Disney wanted was the symbolism that unless we invest in our country, unless we will be frugal, unless we will spend less, and therefore take some of our savings and give it to the government, invest in the government won't be able to man the planes. They won't be able to build with the machinery that's necessary to destroy the Nazis' power, to crush the Nazi war machine. And that was the idea. And again, there's other cartoons of the era which are much more blatant. We have Donald Duck, I think, confronting Hitler. But this one I thought was interesting to me because, as you pointed out as soon as I said it, the original 1933 version, which inspired this 1941 propaganda, anti-Nazi film, actually has parts in it that I think the Strummer would have been very happy with. And that is, of course, the fact that in the original film, the wolf, when he's frustrated by huffing and puffing to get into Practical's house, he decides to disguise himself as a peddler. So let's see if we can hear some of that original version of the Three Little Pigs, the way it was done originally. Here is the scene that, especially after World War II, was excised from the original 1933, and it's very hard to find, but the Antiquarian discovers all.
Who's there?
Okay, that's Practical seeing who's knocking at the door.
I'm the floor brush man. I'm giving a free sample.
So what you see here is, with a hat, like a little yarmulke, a very full beard, a nose that Durante would have wanted, huge schnozola, and he says, "Who is it? I'm the floor brush man, and I'm giving a free sample."
Thank you.
And of course, what happens is, the free sample is a way to get the door open. Practical grabs the free sample and he pushes the lock onto the hook, the Jewish peddler, meaning the wolf disguised as the Jewish peddler. Practical then hits him in the foot, and the wolf cries out in pain, his Jewish mask askew. He's hit a number of times, and you can see the animators still keep the big nose and all the Jew material on him. He falls to the ground. He looks up with a little mustache. Finally, the brush is thrown at him, conks him on the head, and the wolf throws off the costume and begins to huff and puff. And of course, he's not able to do that. So here we have Yitzchak. Perhaps there's other proofs of a lot of anti-Jewish tropes in cartoons, but I think this is one of the most egregious ones. I didn't know, Yitzchak, that the Fuller Brush Man was the type of thing that, I don't know if it was a Jewish company or not. Later, of course, Red Skelton made a film about the Fuller Brush Man, I think, and then Lucille Ball, I think, did a film that was a takeoff on that called The Fuller Brush Woman, I believe. So
was it Fuller Brush Woman or Fuller Brush Girl? I don't remember.
Fuller Brush Girl. Yeah, well, it was definitely Lucy and Red Skelton were involved in this, and about the hijinks that ensues and the traveling salesman. But in order to sort of fulfill what I said, let's get a listen to the classic song, which is probably an earworm to many people, which is, of course, the Big Bad Wolf song, which is in the 1941 Disney Canadian film as well. So here it is. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? And let's talk a little bit about those lyrics as well. So this is Henry Hall's recording of the Frank Churchill song. I figured, you know what, let's hear it not with the little pig voices singing it, but let's hear the popular version in 1933 recording from Henry Hall. Here we go.
Afraid of the big bad wolf, big bad wolf, big bad wolf. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Fa la 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 la. Long ago there were 3 pigs, little handsome piggy wigs. For the big bad, very big wolf, they didn't give 3 figs. Number 1 was very gay, and he built his house with hay. With a hey, hey, toot, he blew on his flute, and he played around all day. Number 2 was fond of jigs, and so he built his house with twigs. Hey, diddle, diddle, he played on his fiddle, and danced with lady pigs. Number 3 said nix on tricks, I will build my house with bricks. He had no chance to sing and dance, 'cause work and play don't mix. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Big bad wolf, big bad wolf. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? La 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 la.
Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?
Okay, so those lyrics are not that well known. People know, of course, the refrain, who's afraid of the big bad wolf, tra la 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 la. But as you can see, that those lyrics, of course, make clear the whole story, the way it was put out by Disney storytellers. But for many people, the metaphor of the big bad wolf was the Depression. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf are we really afraid of the circumstances around us? We need to have spirit. We can't be afraid. But really, if in the story, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf is the stupid song to sing. because the big bad wolf can get you. In other words, the two other pigs really either they end up dying or homeless because they weren't afraid. And I think eventually the song became a song of warning, a song that we can't just expect that the wolf will not penetrate. We can't, because we do have to take measures. And I think especially the way it was used later, we can't just assume because Tojo and Hitler are across the ocean that this is going to affect us. Yes, the big bad wolf can't shatter our lives. We have to be strong and fight against it. We have to be practical and smart and outsmart it. But we can't just dance around and say tra-la-la. I think that was, again, if we take it, Yitzchak, to our present day, there are big dangers, whether it's radical Islam and other forces that have erupted here in the United States. We can't just take the attitude of Pfeiffer and Fiddler and assume that look how far it is. We have enough security. I think the story, the way Disney's planned it out, the song itself, I think we can serve Yitzchak as sort of an indicator of we cannot take evil for granted. It will rear its head.
Oh, and then also the one thing I had mentioned about finding Achdus amidst these problems on the side of good. The Allied forces, even if we're not always, we get together to fight evil. And I saw on YouTube by Kever Rochel, there was only a small kutza was allowed to go visit Kever Rochel on her yard site. And the chief rabbi of the Rabbanut, the Ashkenazic chief rabbi was present. And they had asked him, how can we keep this Achdus going? And he said, Achdus is an interesting thing because we're looking forward to when all the eschatology is realized, the Gar, Zev, and Kevis, that the wolf will dwell together with the lamb, and all these animals that often attack each other or run from each other will live in harmony. And he said that happened already during the Mabul, within the Teva, during the deluge inside the ark. If there's a deluge outside, if there's a flood outside, it's very easy to try to have Achdus, to have unity. But the big trick is to find unity when there's not a Mabul outside. The Gemara says that, right, when Achashverosh took off his ring to Haman, that did more than all the Nevi'im. We shouldn't need anything like that. We should be able to find Achdus, Shalom. Even we can agree to disagree on all kinds of things, without having to have the fear
at the door. Yes, without having the wolf knocking the door. I second your thoughts. I second your idea, Yitzchak. But I think it's important as antiquarians and as musmachim to point to periods in our history to show we can do it, to show that it was done, to realize those images of unity. And maybe as generations to come, we'll take inspiration from the Achdus that we're seeing develop now. You're right, we shouldn't need the flood, but it's good that we have the images retained, whether in writing or in film or in the memories of those that have gone through it. Okay, guys, that's about it. Yitzchak, I think we authenticated the goods tonight as well. Take care, everybody. Safe drive, Yitzchak. Be well.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you liked what you heard. If you did, please take a moment to share this or any of the many episodes available on our platform with friends in order to help grow our community. Until next time, Shalom.